Hello everyone, my name is Gilebogile Tlhokwe and I'm originally from Hammanskraal and currently residing in Johannesburg. I'd love to share with you that I am a proud Tux alumni who graduated from the university in 2018. Welcome to our theme and topic of today, which is vulnerability. And I would like to invite you to engage with me as we are going through this topic. So, vulnerability. I'd like to first start with the conceptual meaning, or rather the literal meaning, and then the conceptual meaning. So the literal meaning of vulnerability is a state or being in a position of being weak or being easily attacked. So you are open to being easily vulnerable, be it physically or even emotionally. But now the conceptual meaning of vulnerability, what I can give you an example of is that as a young person, if let's say I am going to a high school where I have a dream and a passion of becoming a science researcher, but now the school that I'm attending doesn't have a science lab. And so that makes me vulnerable to the potential of not being able to achieve my dream of being a science researcher. Why? Because I'm not able to practically apply what I'm learning from my teacher in the science lab. But now what I can do is that, and that is what's so powerful about vulnerability, is that you can overcome it. And sometimes it can be something that, it doesn't necessarily hold you back completely, but it's something that you can do something about and actually make sure that you can overcome it. And so how can I, as a let's say grade 11 or grade 12 student who's struggling, to implement the practical element of my science subject, is that I can go to my teacher and approach them and ask them to please help me and maybe elaborate the theory work that, I'm being taught in class, to elaborate it in such a way that I can apply it maybe at home. I could find ways where at home use materials where I can apply my theory work within my practical work. And that is one of the ways where the concept of being vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be overcome or you can't do anything about it. And that's where once I've engaged with my teacher, this depends on how passionate I am, obviously, about becoming a science researcher, and through constantly making sure that I'm ahead of my studies and I'm ahead and I'm learning beyond the classroom setting, then I can ensure that I become the science researcher that I'm passionate about. Unlike my previous example about the concept of being vulnerable, there is another element of vulnerability that we can't see, that we can't touch, but we can definitely feel. And it's what makes us human. And this is emotional vulnerability. And it's so powerful that, yes, we can't touch it, yes, we can't see it with our eyes, but we can feel it. And if we don't welcome it and if we don't accept ourselves, in our elements of being vulnerable, it can affect our lives, it can affect our relationships. And come to think of it, upon my research, almost over 10 years ago, this part of vulnerability was never even spoken about. And I don't even think that you guys might be aware of it, but up to this point, if we look back or rather more than 10 years ago, vulnerability was something that was shunned upon. It was seen as being weak. It was seen as something that is only practiced when you are in your secret place. But now, with a lot of research and a lot of authors who are coming up and talking about this and writing about this, one of them, which I would like to encourage you to check out, Google her. Her name is Brené Brown, and she talks about the power of vulnerability, especially emotional vulnerability. And this part of our vulnerability it helps us to connect with one another, with our relationships, with friends, with our parents, so anyone that you have a relationship with. I'd like to take the previous example that I used, and I'm going to bring it into how you can practice this emotional vulnerability, just as an example. So, being vulnerable, like I said, it's not being weak. So how you can bring in vulnerability within this, I'm a passionate, aspiring science researcher in the making, and that act of me approaching my teacher to say, ma'am, I really, really want to be a science researcher one day. And us not having a science lab, it's actually affecting me, because I don't know how I'm going to become a science researcher one day if I don't have all the possible educational tools that can help me achieve this dream already when I'm in high school. What more when I get to university? I'm going to struggle. Ma'am, is there something that you can do to help me? So that doesn't mean that you're being weak. If anything, the power in you reaching out to your teacher is that it could make your teacher aware to other students who are probably maybe shy to talk about the fact that, they don't feel happy about this fact that there isn't a science lab in school. And this will open up, and also encourage more of your peers to speak up and say, ma'am, I'm struggling, So it's not to say that you are exposing yourself and you're portraying yourself as being weak, but more than anything, you are showing, your true intentions of becoming a science researcher. You're sharing your dreams of, whatever it is that you want to achieve with your teacher, and bringing, them into, how you can make this a reality. So what I'm saying is, vulnerability can be a strength. How? It's a strength because now that I've spoken with my teacher, I'm not at a disadvantage. Are you following? And so that now means that if anything, I'm a step ahead, because I've brought my teacher into what's challenging me and what I'm struggling with, and therefore I'm going to get help. And with the help that I'm going to get, I'm more empowered. I'm more empowered to feel confident in applying to be a science researcher, or any other career that I want to pursue. But I'm more empowered because I have more information, and I've stepped beyond what I have at my disposal. So irrespective of my environment, I know that I'm doing a lot more. I'm doing my best to make sure that I reach my goal. And with that said, I would like to share with you guys my personal story of vulnerability, and I'll be breaking it down into different categories that, like I mentioned, you guys should research Brené Brown. But Brené Brown has given these steps and as well as tips and tools on how we can use our vulnerability as a strength. But now I'm going to bring some of the tips that I felt would be great to share with you guys, and how I have used some of the things in my journey, some of the experiences in my journey, and how I have overcome, and now learning and starting to see my own vulnerability as a strength. And just to give you a bit of background before I go into depth about these different steps. When I was when I was in my second year of university, I had just actually let me start with my first year, but it ended up going into this experience, and it ended up expanding into my second year. But basically, from the time that I finished with matric, I had a challenge in the sense that I had a very strong relationship with my grandfather, who practically raised me and my cousins. And my grandfather was my confidant, he was my best friend, and he had been ill for quite a while. But now, shortly after I matriculate, my grandfather, he showed great signs of fully recovering, and he didn't. And so he passed on. And I remember during the time that he had passed on, the guy that I was dating from high school, I had been dating him since grade 10 or 11, and that guy had been apparently, I only found out during the time that during the time that we were burying my grandfather, but I found out that he is actually planning on breaking up with me. But lo and behold, he actually does end up breaking up with me. And this is a very vulnerable time in my life. You can imagine, I was obviously foreseeing myself with this guy for the rest of my life. We were going to be high school sweethearts, and I've just lost someone very, 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 very dear to me. And now I'm in my varsity year, and I'm still in this relationship that I know that I don't want to be in, because I knew on the day that I was burying my grandfather, this guy wanted to break up with me, but I'm still with him. But now I'm at a point where I feel that I have the courage to walk away from this relationship because it's toxic. It was emotionally abusive. It just wasn't a good relationship. It wasn't building me. It wasn't helping with the season that I was in. Like I said, I was already in a vulnerable state of grief, and this relationship wasn't making it better. And so I gathered all the courage that I needed, and I just made the decision that I am going to walk away from this relationship. And countless of times I've tried, and now I'm going to make it work. I'm going to make sure that I actually walk away. And I did. But now the challenges came, as I had just left this relationship, and that is where I would like to engage you guys. Like I said, with the steps that I said I'm going to share with you guys on how I overcame, this very vulnerable season of my life and how it became a strength for me. So stay tuned on the second video, and yes, I'm looking forward to sharing with you guys.